Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is my crafting guide for the Boomsday Project. And when I say that, I don't mean the Boomsday Project meta, I mean specifically cards released in the Boomsday Project. So I'm essentially going to be telling you here which cards I think you should craft. I'm not going to talk about cards you should disenchant. I'm not going to go through every card in the expansion, merely the ones that I think are good enough. They're going to be consistent over long terms. They're in prominent decks right now, and they deserve you spending some dust on them. And in order to do that, I'm going to break cards down essentially into 3 tiers. So tier 1 cards, these are just the best of the best. These are being played in a lot of different decks. They're incredibly powerful, meta-defining cards, and they have virtually zero risk. They're always going to be good as far as we can tell outside of being nerfed or whatever, but of course you get a refund in those scenarios. Then we also have tier 2 cards. These are powerful right now, but they do have some sort of limit. In other words, they might be a class card, so you can only play them in one class, and that of course means they're less useful to you because you can't just dump them into everything. Maybe they're only in one specific archetype, like control versus aggro. They just aren't going to be the ultimate, collection defining sort of card, but still incredibly good. It'd show up in the meta very prominently right now. And then finally, there are tier 3 cards. Now, these are still good, still seeing play in competitive decks, but they're rather risky. So they have, the chance to fall off. If the one deck they're played in right now, falls out of the meta, this card might not be good for a while. So it looks good at the moment, but there's a chance it just lacks the consistency or staying power to stay relevant forever. So it's just not as good to commit your arcane dust to. And of course, that said, there are really 2 ways to build a collection in Hearthstone. You can go out and you can build one specific deck, or you can build a fundamentally strong collection and try to accrue a lot of different good cards. This guide, of course, works more towards that second style where you're just assembling good cards and you aren't necessarily trying to build one specific deck. That might not be right for you. You might want to focus instead on the very best deck you can afford. That's fine. You just may not find this guide quite as helpful. All that said, I think it's time to just go ahead and move through each of the different rarities in the Boomsday Project and show you which cards I think deserve crafting. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So up first here we have the legendary cards, and there are actually quite a few good legendaries to craft in the Boomsday Project as far as I'm concerned. Starting off with tier 1 cards, there's one that certainly stands out above all the rest, and that is Ziliax. This guy is seeing play in a wide variety of decks, and frankly, he's good in both control style and aggro style decks as well, because you can use him to stack up on an aggressive mech start and just give you a really crazy board presence, a minion that just takes a great trade and piles up on stats and has all these nice little benefits. Beyond that, of course, he has a great defensive potential too, thanks to that lifesteal and taunt, and again, taking value trades. So right now, this is definitely the jack of all trades sort of card in the expansion, and that's why it's the most played legendary in the Boomsday Project right now. And even if mechs fall out of favor, I still think Ziliax has the potential to be a solid card. So I think this is a pretty low risk craft, and that's the exact reason he stands above the rest in the tier 1 spot. So up next here at the tier 2 spot, we see all of the different class legendary cards that are seeing play right now in the Boomsday Project, and it's a really nice assortment, a couple legendary spells, a few minions, and even the hero card with Dr. Boom Mad Genius. And each of these basically figure prominently in at least one meta deck, but they also just look like the kinds of cards that offer consistently strong options for, not only decks that exist today, but still those in the future as well. And really the only thing holding these cards back is simply the fact that they're limited to a single class. But still, if that's a class you play often or a deck you want to try out, you just can't go wrong with any of these. They all do something really cool and incredibly powerful as well. Particularly with Dr. Boom Mad Genius, that's the sort of card you can almost build a deck around by itself, just because hero cards are so strong and can do such cool things. So really, you can't go wrong with any of these right now as long as you anticipate playing that class. And then finally, we have the tier 3 spot, and only one card here making the cut, and I would say only barely at that. This is Mecha'thun, a card I never expected to be putting into a crafting guide, but frankly, people are still playing Mecha'thun and still finding ways to put this into at least moderately viable competitive decks. Namely, I think Priest right now is the standout with the crazy death rattle ticking abomination combos that make Cthulhu go off. That seems to be You know, not a tier 1 deck by any means, but at least something that can be played on the ladder with some success. And then there are other kind of fringe decks out there as well. I just saw, you know, Fibonacci played a Control Warrior with Mecha'thun, apparently working pretty well. So this is one of those cards that can work, but obviously very risky. The decks aren't necessarily great. People are mostly playing it, I think, for fun. So it's something you can craft. Maybe there will be a good deck eventually, but there's also just a high likelihood this thing falls out of favor once it's out of flavor and not new anymore. So I think Mecha'thun is okay to craft. Just be very mindful and careful about it when you do. And that said, this is a pretty good batch of legendary cards. I mean, not all expansions, frankly, have this many that find success, and I think we'll see other future cards in the Boomsday Project. Remember, these are the ones I'm recommending right now. It doesn't mean the cards not on this list can't ever be good. They might be good in the future. We just haven't seen the evidence or the defense to craft those at this point. So keep an open mind moving forward, but for now, it looks like all of these are, at the moment, good options for you. So now let's move on to epics in the Boomsday Project. And although we had quite a few legendary epics, they're a very different story. And in fact, when it comes to tier 1 epic cards, we just haven't seen any in the Boomsday Project yet make a great impact. There's no star epic that every deck needs to have or is defining multiple archetypes. It's nothing is shifting or shaping the meta. So this is just that big red X. And that's not particularly uncommon. There aren't a ton of great epic cards in general, which I think, by the way, is good. I think epic cards should be reserved for more fun stuff or build around stuff, not things that are, you know, everybody needs, because epics can be pretty prohibitive to craft. Now, that said, there's at least one tier 2 card here I think is making a rather big impact on the meta, and that is Dream Petal Florist for Druid. This one, of course, setting up all kinds of crazy combo potential by reducing big combo cards' cost so significantly by 7 mana that Druid can do things that are unfair, and we're seeing that in play across a couple different variations, essentially, of combo Druid, and I think a card like this enables that archetype so well that that's going to last for a while, and if you're a Druid player, Dream Petal Florist seems like the kind of card that is safe to craft. Beyond that, no other epic cards, though, making the cut. And then finally for tier 3 here, we have just a few cards right now that are enabling archetypes, but they're fringe archetypes and they're not like tier 1 or tier 2 archetypes. So for instance, Necrium Vial for Death Rattle Rogue, Reckless Experimenter currently setting up Mecha'thun Priest like we talked about previously, and then Academic Espionage and Augmented Relic often just enabling shuffle shenanigans, whether that's in Rogue with Academic Espionage or just Augmented Relic can be played in a lot of different places, but namely Rogue right now. So these again are cards that are seeing play on the constructed ladder right now, but they aren't necessarily the best of the bunch. They aren't defining the best decks in the game, and they might fall out of favor again. So somewhat risky, but certainly still viable cards in one way or another, and I'm really glad Augmented Relic made the cut. That said, let's move on to rare cards. And when it comes to rare cards, there is one that is absolutely dominant, easy tier 1 craft. If I had a tier S that was above tier 1, this card would make the list. And that's Giggling Inventor, the most played card in all of the Boomsday Project. This thing is being tossed into every kind of deck. It's great at shutting down aggro decks because it presents such a defensive board presence, but it's also being played in aggro decks. Even odd rogues are playing Giggling Inventor just because it's a big pile of stats, it protects other assets. It's just the most flexible card in the expansion. It's the standout star, and everybody is playing it. So an easy tier 1 craft. This card will improve your collection immensely at a very affordable rare card crafting cost. Now, when it comes to tier 2 cards, we've seen a few stand out so far. I think the most standout of these is Soul Infusion. It's being played a ton in Zoo Warlock decks. These buffs hitting things like Doubling Imp or Serenite Chain Gang are game-changing sorts of plays. If you dump that big old 4/5 times 2 Serenite Chain Gang, that's going to win you games often by itself. So Soul Infusion working really well in the board-centric Zoo style. We've also seen Spider Bomb show up in some Death Rattle / Mech Hunter builds. So that's an archetype that's clinging to tier 2 at the moment, it looks like, and will probably remain prominent throughout the expansion. This one is a little bit risky. I think you could arguably say this is a tier 3 card simply because it is mech-based, and if mechs fall out, then Spider Bomb might lose some prominence. But nonetheless, as a minion itself, I think it does still have some viability given that strong Death Rattle effect being able to trade up. So I think as a tool, it's fairly safe to craft for Hunter. And then finally, Mechanical Whelp here, being played in a couple different Death Rattle builds essentially at the moment. I think most notably in Rogue at the beginning of the expansion. But this is one of those cards that's kind of surprising to me, and I think it may not always be played, so perhaps another consideration for Tier 3. But since it's a neutral card, that means you can play it in a lot of different places, and that increases the likelihood it'll see play over time. So just barely making the Tier 2 cut. And then finally, we have some Tier 3 rare cards here. These are, again, just cards that are being included in various meta decks. They're not necessarily the defining aspects of those decks. They are good and high synergy, but that synergy aspect of these cards means they could get worse over time. And although I think you can make a pretty strong argument that Omega Assembly and Dinomatic are moving up as Odd Warrior, with that mech slant starts to gain some popularity and ground in the meta, for now they are still theoretically mech synergy cards. I know they do stand on their own in some ways, but they benefit best in a mech deck or a Dr. Boom deck because that's what really makes your mechs so powerful and strong. I think because of that connection and that synergy, they are a little bit limited long-term in what they might be able to achieve. Same can be said for Fireworks Tech, Necrium Blade, and Celestial Emissary as well, although I think all of those are so strong that they will still see some play over time. So good cards to craft. Debatable what tier in which they belong, but that's up to you. All of these are rare cards. They're pretty affordable, so committing to these is not a high risk, but there is, in fact, pretty high reward with a lot of these. So I would say just craft all of these cards. The prioritization beyond Giggling Inventor is really just up to your personal preferences and what you think you're going to enjoy playing the most. So that said, that actually wraps it up for the crafting guide. Now, I'm not going to talk through common cards for two reasons. One, there are just a lot of common cards. Secondly, they're so cheap to craft. If you just need a common card, you should make it for any given deck. You probably open most of them in your packs anyway, so you don't even have to think about crafting common cards. So they're just not really worth the discussion time. But everything else, those are good cards to have in your collection. They're going to get you through the Boomsday Project meta and probably still serve you for a long time to come in Hearthstone, which is really the goal with a crafting guide like this. That said, of course, I know out there a lot of people have different opinions. If you think there's a card I missed or something that's gaining a lot of ground quickly in the meta and deserves to be mentioned, leave that in the comments below. I'm happy to have the second opinion. And frankly, anybody seeking out crafting advice should always look for second opinions. You shouldn't just rely on me and trust me outright. You should consider what other people have to say and, of course, make a decision based on your own reasoning and logic as well. But until then, guys, I appreciate you so much for watching, and I thank you. And until next time, game on.